Okay. To be
Little
recognized.
Okay. Okay. Great. Gemara interpretation. Of course, the first.
No, I don't think we were there.
We didn't get there. Keep my soul for I am pious. Yes. Keep my soul for. We did that whole pious with David.
Why was it called Kila? Because he would embarrass.
No. So we didn't do Solomon. Go backwards.
Yeah, it must have been right above where we talked about Kila and then stop.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah, someone else said that too, Paul, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, why do the dots appear above the word? Yep.
I remember the Lule. Sure.
You went in the wrong direction.
Cause him to lose his opportunities.
Yeah, we talked about Jacob, talking about the transgression.
He was paying. Why did Jacob not? Okay.
Oh, didn't we end with Ezra and Moses and talking about the similarity there?
And
Yeah,
that's when
that's exactly where we ended. Okay.
That's when you said Ezra's son's name.
So I think we're right here at the second to last paragraph, right? Does that seem right to everyone?
Yep.
Yeah.
I love
Okay.
that word. Homiletic.
Any lingering thoughts from last week before we just jump in?
I have no memories from yesterday.
Great. Let's do it. Who wants to read?
The Gemara interprets homiletically that until your people will cross refers to the first entry into Eretz Israel during the time of Joshua, while until the people you have acquired pass over refers to the second entry following the exile in Babylonia. Based on the juxtaposition of these two entries in this single verse, the sages said Israel was worthy of having a miracle performed on its behalf in the time of Ezra the scribe, just as one was performed on their behalf in the time of Joshua ben Nun. However, transgression caused the absence of a miracle.
Yeah, and that's right where we stopped and had that conversation. Yep, great. Okay, keep going.
The Gemara returns to explain what we learned in the Mishnah. And the rabbis say the time for the recitation of the evening Shema is until midnight. Wow. The Gemara
we're returning to our core conversation, though, right? This is what we originally were talking about.
So should we skip this? And
No, keep going. No, I'm saying like this is the original conversation of the Gemara that we began with.
The Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion do they hold in explaining the verse when you lie down? If they explain this verse in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that when you lie down is the time when people customarily go to sleep, then let the rabbis also say that the time for the recitation of Shema extends in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer until the end of the first watch.
Okay, so we're getting a combination of a few different things that we experienced above, and we're also getting a sense where we can hopefully see the seam lines of the Gemara. Like at some point, this paragraph probably connected with the last paragraph that talked about this subject, and yet an editor went in and added all this other content.
Okay. And if they explain this verse in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, who says that when you lie down refers to the entire night, then let the rabbis also say that one may recite the evening Shema until dawn in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Gamliel. So I have a question for you. Sometimes they do rabbi, sometimes they do Rabban, sometimes they do Rabbah. Does it make a difference, or it's just somebody's preference?
They're all titles. There are some differences that are not significant here. They refer to, yeah.
I haven't seen Rabbeinu.
So Rabbeinu you tend not to find in the Talmud, and Rabbeinu tends to be an honorific that you find today. It means our rabbi.
Okay.
So right, like if you were honoring someone, Rabbeinu Susan Talvi kind of thing. That makes sense.
Okay. So what do you think about the Shema until dawn? I never heard that.
So yeah, what's the distinction between Gamliel and Eliezer's thinking here? Not their specific opinions, but their approach. Anyone want to summarize?
It sounds to me that they're separating, well, the time, the first watch. And then if you go beyond it, you really can't recite the Shema. But Rabban Gamliel is saying that you can go until it's dawn to still recite the Shema. So there's, you have a lot of other watches going on with it.
Nice. And more conceptually, the distinction between their thinking, I think, is also important as well, right? Where Gamliel wants to tie it to sort of the natural cycle of the world, and Eliezer wants to tie it to human civilization and how humans experience time. Right? Does that make sense? Do you see that here?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't get that. That's good. That's why you're the rabbi. Okay.
It's good to have done brachot before too. Okay, let's keep going. Someone want to jump in?
Sarah.
The Gemara answers, actually, the rabbis hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, and the fact that they say until midnight is in order to distance a person from transgression. As it was taught in the Baraita, the rabbis created a fence for their pronouncements with regards to the recitation of the Shema, in order to prevent a situation where a person comes home from the field in the evening, tired from his day's work, and knowing he is permitted to recite the Shema until dawn, says to himself, I will go home, eat a little, drink a little, sleep a little, and then I will recite Shema and recite the evening prayer. In the meantime, he's overcome with sleep and ends up sleeping all night. However, since
I love how they're spelling it out totally for us here, right? Like we've stopped dealing in these theoreticals. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was very specific.
Yeah.
However, since one is concerned lest he fall asleep and fail to wake up before midnight in order to recite the Shema at the appropriate time, he will come from the field in the evening, enter the synagogue, and until it is time to pray, he will immerse himself in Torah. If he is accustomed to reading the Bible, he reads. If he is accustomed to learning Mishnayot, a more advanced level of study, and then he recites the Shema and prays as he should. Can we scroll down a little bit?
Yeah.
He recites the Shema and prays as he should. When he arrives home, he eats his meal with a contented heart and recites a blessing.
Okay, what is the takeaway of this like odd little story that showed up?
I really think it's.
Go ahead, Renee.
I think it's like how to be Jewish wherever you are. How to order your day, what's crucial. All right, everybody's going to go out and work and they're going to come back and they're going to eat and they're going to go to sleep. But you want to live a Jewish life? This is what you have to think of. And this is how you have to structure it.
Okay, nice. I wasn't even seeing that there. I like that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And they're giving you leeway. And they're giving you leeway. Like you got to work, and if you miss the regular time to say a prayer, it's okay to do it at another time.
Actually, I kind of like that business of, this is everybody's province. Everyone can study Torah. If you're so inclined, you can study Mishnah. It has a little bit of a democratic feeling to it that I like.
Right, there's an insistent. Keep going, Renee. Sorry.
Well, it's just this whole thing about, God saying, I am holy and you will be holy through me or for me. There's that whole thing of every Jew, no matter how humble, this is his or her province. Everyone can study, everyone can come to understand whatever they can come to understand. This is not some arcane, secretive, priestly, structure. It's everybody's province.
So
I think what it showed
what's interesting is I think looking at both of those strands too, Renee, because throughout Jewish history and within basically every Jewish civilization you find, there is this tension between those who want to democratize and those who are super elitist in their approach. And you find that certainly within the Talmud. You find that later in Maimonides. The whole Hasidic movement is basically an egalitarianizing movement in that sense, not in any gender sense.
Right.
Uh,
But we can see it there. I'm reading my own, preferences into this for sure.
You're doing a great job.
Yeah, I think it's also showing a humanistic approach to it. And
keep going with that, Paul.
Yes, it's not.
Were you talking to your microphone too?
I'm sorry. It's not a parochial. Sorry, it's not a parochial approach. I mean, you're getting an option. It's how many times do we come home, we're exhausted. We just say, okay, honey, wake me up in a few minutes. I'm going to just lay down for a minute. And she doesn't wake you up, but you do wake up like 2, 3 in the morning. And then at least you still can say it. It's so humanistic that way. I love this.
Yeah. It bends to the realities of human life. Go ahead, Toby.
But at the same time, they're telling you not to do that. Because if you do, then you're really coming to the point where you won't say it at all. And so it's building a fence, some leeway, but also some structure. We know the rabbis are really big on the structure, a fence around this. And they come out and say a fence around this, but then they're going to put another fence around the fence around the fence. And, that's when we get into Mishigas. But
does the fence metaphor, is everyone familiar with it, or does it make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Is there anyone who's not?
Yeah, you could repeat it.
So does someone want to explain the fence metaphor?
Well, the rabbis said, they said to do it before midnight, because if you don't do it before midnight, you could fall asleep and hence transgress. So we're going to put a fence around it. And we have so many other laws where they also put a fence around it, even though you are not technically transgressing against that rule. You have to stay away from the boundary between it, because so you don't tiptoe over it.
So from our current perspective, often fence, particularly within a liberal tradition, almost is a little we sometimes say it a little mockingly, even, right? Like the whole idea that in order to make sure that you don't accidentally mix milk and meat, you have to have totally separate dishes, right? You'll find people who sort of speak of that mockingly. But I think Talmudically, one of the things, and I'm combining some of the things Renee said and Toby said, and Bobby and some other voices here, but one of the things that you tend to see is that it's much more akin to someone with a substance abuse problem who knows that there's certain spaces they shouldn't go into. And that's the sort of fence that they're dealing with. It's really core human psychology, kind of, right? The other thing, I think it was Toby who mentioned this, that I just wanted to draw out because it becomes a core important distinction throughout basically every concept of Jewish law, is there's a fundamental difference seen between what you can do, what you can plan to do, and what was acceptable after the fact.
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And they're not giving it the labels that they'll give it later here, but that's what we're seeing here with this whole discussion of what you can do when, right? Like you can't plan to do it at 5 a.m. But if you find yourself at 5 a.m, you can then do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And you find that through, I mean, we saw that in Bava Metzia with all sorts of the tort law and laws of lost property and like that kind of stuff too, the exact same concept. Okay, any thoughts on those two things?
I don't see in here what we've read any real rule that says you can't do it at 5 a.m. before dawn. I think what their fear is that you'll get in the middle of something or you'll fall asleep and then you won't do it at all. And that's what they're trying to prevent.
So let's get this next sentence, because just to like drive it home here.
Yeah. The
Is that right?
Baraita concludes with a warning. Anyone who transgresses the pronouncements of the sages is liable to receive the death penalty. So it doesn't have to be
Oh.
Torah. It can be rabbinic, and you're still in big trouble.
Right? All right, look at this. What an ending to this sentence.
What nonsense.
Remember who's writing this, by the way. The people who are writing this are totally powerless people living powerless in their moment with no ability to enforce any of this. And it's worth noting, if you just take the bold text here, right? Anyone who transgresses the pronounces the sages is liable to death, meaning like they would deserve it. The other words make it seem much more like it's an actual thing.
Maybe you're going to get zapped from the heavens.
That's kind of the idea here.
Well, as always, I mean, this whole concept of the fence around the Torah, siag l'Torah in Hebrew. And as Toby said, the fences around the fences around the fences, it gets very elaborate. It's embroidery upon embroidery. And yet, it's how to maintain this Jewish way of life, this Jewish attitude toward things, how to be that, how to be an ish tzaddik, wherever you are. And in order to protect, I mean, you use the classic example, of the milk and meat thing. There's just one line about not boiling kid in its mother's milk. Okay, that's a priestly injunction, and it refers probably to a specific ritual that was maybe familiar to people at the time when it was written. But, how does this have meaning for us? What do we take away from it? How does it apply to our everyday lives when we're so far away from that experience? We don't even remember why, what the origin of the injunction is, except that we can see in there there's something crucial, something important. And, I had a grandmother who was basically illiterate, and she focused on the rules of kashrut. And she used to say, if you don't do this, what is it that makes us different? And that's the way she looked at it. So
I think
that siag l'Torah exists. It's not just a fence around the Torah; it's a fence around us too. And I think it's interesting that it's a fence, not a wall, because the fence is permeable. I mean, you can get over a fence, under a fence, you can see through a fence. So it's like we're going to exist in these other places. We actually are going to be somewhat assimilated. We're going to participate in the everyday aspects of life. And yet there's this fence around us, that we can see through, that other people can see through. It can be gotten over and under, but it's there.
Do we have Marion and Renee and Toby on at the same time?
We do.
Well,
same time, same place. Sarah, you were trying to say something.
I was going to say, I love that concept of community, Renee, because that's what I see in this example. Whenever they're talking about, they spell out very explicitly what's their fear, that you're going to go home, you're not going to participate in Torah, you're not going to go to the synagogue, you're going to be alone, right? You're going to be divorced from that Jewishness, which is so important. And the pronouncement here, anyone who transgresses the pronouncement of the sages is liable to receive death. It's this really interesting, within a community, right? You have to have a power structure of some kind to govern it. And it's the sages are in the middle of creating it. We can see it being created. So they may not actually have any power, but the perception of power within the community is what's necessary. And it's just such this amazing glimpse at something insentient, something being born.
Renee, you were saying it's a fence, not a wall. I really think that they wanted a wall. And we see that particularly in Eastern Europe, that with the made all the mitzvot that are elaborated on, and they're cast in stone. And the whole idea is to keep us separate from the community. We want a fence. They wanted a wall because their fear was if we saw what the rest of the world was like, it would be too tempting for us to follow their ways. And that's what the fight with the Maccabees was about too. It was about the assimilation of many Jews because they saw the Greek culture, which was really a neat culture, and they wanted to participate. And as a minority religion, a very small minority religion, we almost have to be, in a way, separate. You know,
I think it's two concepts of community is the larger mixed community in the diaspora, and then there's the internal community of the actual local people who are meeting in the synagogue, who are worshiping together, praying together, and then following a specific rabbi's authority. You know.
So
this is an uneasy balancing act. You know, it's a really uneasy, and you know, I agree with you, Toby, that in some way, in some attitudes and some outlooks, it has become a wall. And then, you know, that's where you then get the Reform Judaism movement, you get Jewish renewal, you get Reconstruction, you know, like there's this constant recreating, you know, and reconsidering.
Who was it? There is a Jewish theologian who just Neil Gilman, who taught at the not Reform, at the conservative seminary, and I was lucky enough when there was a Cage conference on Jewish education to have some classes with him, and his philosophy was that every Jewish generation is supposed to take the Shema and the Torah, and they're supposed to redefine it to meet their needs for what their ideas of what Judaism was. And yet the Orthodox, which Rabbi Danny has said, was almost a reaction to Reform Judaism, saying, no, we want definite rules. We want a wall. And the only way we're going to keep Jews from assimilating and converting out of Judaism is to keep them separate. But what we're finding is there's I'm being told my internet.
Oh, mine says I'm unstable too, which always feels like a very judgy way of talking about my internet. Can everyone hear me? Am I coming through okay? So I want to make a differentiation. I want to make a differentiation in terms of time periods and approaches.
So-and-so is unstable.
It's okay. I'm muting.
Okay.
I want to think of time periods that are dreaming it up moments. And I want to think of time periods, and at some level, these are time periods, at some levels, these are just mindsets that you find, and so they're dominant at some time periods and others. But dreaming it up moments, and when I say dreaming it up moments, I mean moments like early Reform Judaism, and I mean like moments of early Reform Judaism in the United States. I mean the early settlers in Israel, before that word settler had the meaning it does today, like the early Zionist Aliyot. Those people, the early kibbutz movement, these people are not in the business of the preservation of a culture. It's not what they're doing. It's not what they're concerned with. It's not what they want to do. I'm going to go ahead and put the early CRC in this category as well, actually, that very much is overtly about not preserving something, but creating something new, right? That's really different than moments that are about the preservation of culture. I want to suggest that a lot of the energy that has gone into, call it 1968 Judaism, 65 Judaism, until pretty recently in the United States was about preservation of culture, right? Anything that's a demographic fear falls into that kind of approach. So in that sense, I think we can understand the creation of particularly like Haredi orthodoxy, the most ultra-Orthodox approaches, as fundamentally preserving or preservationist, right? Conservative in a small c in the most extreme sense. And so we can think of orthodoxy within that way. And so when we think of things like fences around the Torah, that's often what comes to mind, is that small c conservative approach. I want to actually suggest, first of all, we've got lots and lots of voices. Remember, this is a document of 600 plus years that we're dealing with. So we've got all of these voices and all of these moments there. But I want to suggest that particularly the earlier sources that you get in the Talmud tend to actually be dreaming it up sources rather than conservationist voices, and that often we read them because of our preconceived notion that people who are concerned with Talmud are conservationists. We tend to read that into the text when actually they are dreaming it up. They're not trying to keep people Jewish. They're trying to convince people that the way that they are doing this is a legitimate way to do this in a new and uncertain moment. Okay, that was a lot. I want to hear some thoughts, reactions. Yeah, Paul.
A quick question about this. Now I was just thinking, it can almost be like when you said in the beginning of it, it's almost like the telephone game, that they're doing it for themselves at first, and then the next one said, and then the next one said, and they're trying to customize it, the rules for themselves. And it's like that whole telephone game all over again.
Wikipedia is the model that I sort of think of, right? Where different people are going through and editing the article over 600 years. And actually, you know what? We're doing brachot right now, which is concerned with the laws of blessings. But one of the things that stands out is basically if you're dealing with almost any other tractate other than brachot, it doesn't read as religious. It reads as an attempt to create a coherent legal thinking system. Right? We did Bava Metzia for 2 years, and there's very little that pegs or pings sort of religious bells. We're doing brachot now because brachot, I think, is in some ways the most accessible. Not to mention we're going to get some great, crazy stories coming up soon.
We've already had some.
Okay, there was a lot of conceptual that I just threw out there, though. Does anyone have any thoughts or reactions to that? Or
Actually, it makes sense because before you've told us that the rabbis were actually, the group that became the rabbis were a very small group, and they were I have to clean this up. They were the pot stirrers. They're the ones who caused the problems and made changes. And they were trying to get away from the temple service because for whatever reason. I mean, like most of us would agree that, no, we don't want the temple again because we don't want animal sacrifice.
So that's not their point, though. Their point is not that they don't want animal sacrifice and don't want the temple. In fact, right, their traditional approach, they're working towards the rebuilding of the temple. Their point is that there is another way to do this. Does that make sense?
Another way to get to the temple? Is the temple a symbol for getting it all together? That when the Jews get it all together and we're all living Jewishly, then the temple will be rebuilt.
So you're asking a question about messianism, and the thing to say about messianism is that every messianic statement reflects the moment that it's written more than it reflects anything else.
Okay.
But I would say that the dominant messianic approach during non-crazy times in the Jewish world, right? Crazy times bring out messianism. That, right, doesn't matter what group you're talking about, it brings out that kind of thinking. Right? You look at the conspiracy thinking that you have today, right? QAnon in some ways is comparable, right? But the general approach that you find, for instance, like through Maimonides, is the Messiah is a title that's given to someone once they've earned it, which is a really interesting way of making a messianic world always aspirational and never achievable, right? The interesting thing, by the way, is if you look at Maimonides' list of requirements for the Messiah, like if David Ben Gurion had built the temple, done. That was all the requirements. But alas, which is also another note that like classical Jewish messianism doesn't imagine it. It's not apocalyptic like Christian messianism is. And certainly there are Jewish messianisms that are highly informed by Christian apocalyptic thinking. I think Chabad is. I don't think they realize it, but like Eastern Orthodox Church is very influential there. But otherwise, it's almost always held out. Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts before we jump back into the Talmud?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, Renee.
I'll just mention something that came up for me. Something that Bobby said last week or the week before. These guys are actually just having a great old time. Yeah. I mean, there's an aspect here. So I've been watching a lot of British television, and they're not down at the pub playing darts. If they were French, they'd be, in the town square playing boule, but they're in the cheder, and this is, these are the pieces that they're moving around. They're having a great old time. And a lot of this reminds me of like some of the activities that we're engaged in. I've got friends all of a sudden doing jigsaw puzzles, and I'm doing the crossword puzzle every day from the New York Times, and it's just like these are the little pieces of this world, and they're just saying, how can we move them around? How can we make sense of them? How can we make them come out to be something different? So I mean, part of it is just strikes me as recreational.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey Renee, just a quick question on the crossword puzzle. Are you able to do the Saturday and Sunday ones?
Oh yes.
Oh my God, you are brilliant.
Well,
okay.
The Saturday takes a while.
Let's jump back into the text, because I actually think that this next line is exactly sort of an illustration of what Renee was just saying. That what you're going to see here is we were in the middle of one conversation, and then we get this very odd pronouncement about the death penalty, which probably is a later addition anyways, someone else putting that edit in. And then someone else is going to do a Wikipedia entry after this to have a discussion about that odd death penalty reference.
Danny,
that's not going to go unmentioned here either. So we really see that Wikipedia quality.
Danny, what's that little N by penalty? Does that mean anything?
No.
Yeah, it says that there's a reference on the bottom under the notes section.
Okay.
By the way, the text that we're looking at, other than the notes, you can follow along on your own on safaria.org if you'd like, if you don't like seeing it on here. But will someone read from This is a Startling Conclusion?
I'll finish this. This is a startling conclusion. What is different in all other places that is not taught that one is liable to receive the death penalty? And what is different here that it is taught that he is liable to receive the death penalty?
Right. Someone else is also kind of horrified by this reference also and drops this into the text.
Right. And here we go into commentary. There is no unique stringency apparent in the rabbinic restriction on the recitation of the Shema.
Okay, Toby, will you read this next paragraph in bold first, and then we'll read the whole thing? Because it just stands out here. Remember, the bold is actually in the Gemara, and everything else is commentary from around the sides.
So if you wish, say that overcome. If you wish, say overcome by sleep. And if you wish, say to exclude he who says that the evening prayer is optional. It teaches us it's mandatory. That is wicked.
Okay, go ahead and read the whole thing now. Let's see what the commentary
The Gemara offers two answers explaining that the conclusion of the Baraita essentially stems not from the magnitude of the transgression, but rather from concern that the quote fence created around this particular mitzvah may be neglected.
Okay, pause for a second. I want to note that this was a Baraita. I hadn't noticed that enough. This is not like a highly authoritative text. This is an external, non or less canonical tradition. And And so they're clearly playing with that on purpose.
Okay, so the death
Okay, keep going,
penalty
Philly.
is part of a Baraita and not part of the text.
Yeah, there you
Aha.
go, exactly.
Okay. If you wish, say that one returning from work is quite anxious to go to sleep, and due to the risk that he will be overcome by sleep, he must be particularly vigilant in the recitation of Shema. And if you wish, say instead that strong language is employed here in order to exclude the opinion of he who says that although the morning prayer and the afternoon prayer are mandatory, the evening prayer is optional. Therefore, it teaches us that the evening prayer is mandatory, and anyone who transgresses the pronouncement of the sages in this regard is liable to receive the death penalty.
Okay, these both strike me as two pretty weak apologetics for this death penalty line. But in either case, right, they're trying to make an argument that, oh no, it's just pedagogical. They're just threatening.
But you know what? We're not looking at how they stress the importance of the Shema. We don't see that with
Yes.
a lot of the other prayers. But this prayer, if you don't, you could be put to the death penalty.
Nice, right? Like we're missing the forest for the trees here, Paul. That's exactly right. That's the real focus here. They're putting an intensity and pressure on this notion of Shema that they haven't put on hardly anything else. So let's keep asking the question of why. Oh, Renee, yeah, please.
You know, I think it's interesting that the word liable keeps showing up every time the death penalty is liable, not, you know, deserving of the death penalty, not they will get the death penalty. Okay, it could happen, liable, you know, it's just this sort of imaginary worst case scenario.
Yeah,
Well, not imaginary. I think it has maybe more impact than imaginary, but like you said, these are people without temporal power.
And they don't mean it in a real way. I think that's really important, Renee, that they are using this in the same way that like Karen's grandmother talks about 63 million Americans and what they deserve. Like it's right. People talk about it in ways that they don't actually mean. And it's a strength of language though, which is Paul's point. So yeah, thank you. Okay, let's keep going.
We see a lot of threats in Torah that never happened.
Yeah, less common in Talmud, but yeah.
Well, Talmud too. Probably Talmud even more than Torah. Am I right?
You'll let us know. Okay, someone want to keep reading?
In this Baraita, the master said that when one returns from work in the evening, he enters the synagogue, recites Shema, and prays. From this Baraita, we see that at night, just as during the day, one first recites Shema and then prays.
Okay, pause for a second. This word praise is a very technical word when the Talmud uses it in Brachot, and it refers to the Amidah, the recitation of that set liturgical set of 19 prayers that sort of are the political piece, meaning the external, outward focused piece of Jewish experience, but it's the only part that the rabbis mean when they're talking about prayer. And so they are creating the Siddur as we know it here, but it doesn't exist until they're doing it here. So that's what we're seeing here, if that makes sense. So the Shema is piece one. And when you think about the Shema, that's from Baruch Hu through Micha Mocha, basically, all of that stuff. Shema, V'ahavta, Yotzer Or, Mariv Aravim, Ahavat Olam, Ahava Rabbah, all of that stuff, and even more in a traditional Siddur is what we mean by Shema. And Amidah is that section that begins with Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Ve'Elohei Avotenu V'Imotenu, right? Those are the two pieces that they're talking about here when they say Shema and prayer. So let's start this paragraph. Yeah, Bobby.
Can I just answer? Did I miss something? I mean, who's the master?
It's the title of one of the great rabbis. I always forget. Will someone Google who master is Mar in the Talmud? And report back to us.
Okay. Go on, Sarah.
Okay, so knowing that distinction that we're dealing with two technical words here, prayer and Shema, Will someone go ahead and, whoever was reading, will you start this over again?
From the beginning or from the supports?
In the Baraita, from the beginning of this paragraph.
In this Baraita, the master said that one returns from work in the evening, he enters the synagogue, recites Shema, and then prays the Amidah.
Notice it doesn't say enters the synagogue, probably because synagogues didn't exist as a normative thing in the same way during the writing of the Gemara as they end up existing during the time the commentary around it is written.
I thought there were a lot of old synagogues from like the 1st century in Israel. Or were they not?
There are,
go over to Babylon, or?
So there are old synagogues, but they tend to, we think, be much more houses of study than they are prayer centers.
So like a yeshiva?
Much closer, yeah. Beit Midrash, yeah.
Okay.
But yes, they certainly exist in the past, and there certainly are synagogues. You can see the cultural shift towards synagogues as a center of prayer as you move into the commentary as opposed to the original text is all I'm trying to draw.
Okay. So they're not as prominent and they move into the focus here as these rabbis leave the fringe and
become all shades. Exactly. Yep.
Okay. From this Baraita, we see that at night, just as during the day, one first recites Shema and then prays the Amidah. This supports the opinion of Rabbi Yohanan, as Rabbi Yohanan said, who is assured of a place in the world to come. It is one who juxtaposes the blessing of redemption recited after Shema to the evening prayer.
Okay, pause for a second. What is the blessing of redemption?
Recited after Shema.
You say it after. In fact, I kind of gave it away a second ago if you listen. It's called the Ge'ulah within the service, which means redemption. What is the classic image of Jewish redemption? What's the moment in Jewish history that most represents it?
When Ezekiel comes back.
Okay, I love that. Even more like classic. Crossing the Red Sea.
Okay.
Oh.
Right? Yetziat Mitzrayim, the leaving of slavery. So they're talking about Mi Chamocha here. So this is, I actually use this section as a teaching somewhat often where I talk about this idea where the rabbis of the Talmud are concerned that this reminder of the experience of slavery needs to come in between these two concepts, between the inward focusing work of the Shema and the outward focusing work of the Amidah.
Okay.
So we're talking about Mi Chamocha here when he says this. The other piece is why would the ancient rabbis of the Talmud be so concerned? Why would they put such emphasis on the recitation of Shema and Amidah? Anyone have a thought on this more conceptually, broader?
Well, the Shema is our basic theology. It says there's one God, Adonai is that God, and there's no other.
Okay.
And in polytheistic societies, that was big. It also, well, I was going to say, I have seen in some Jewish teachings that Christianity is not monotheistic, but
Right,
I
that's the
reject
Trinity.
that totally as being obnoxious.
Can I just
Well-
take a stab at this? I was thinking because of the Torah. You open up before you open up the Torah, you have to recite the Shema.
So
Do you have
maybe
to,
I'm
or is
too
that what we
cynical.
do with CRC? Is that a law? I mean, that's what we do with CRC, but is that a law?
Well, we do that over at base also.
Okay.
Let's
Say that
also
again, Paul.
remember-
We all
Okay.
the Shema is recited at base when
Sure.
the Torah is taken out of the ark.
I thought
Let's
that was
also
more of each individual taking saying their Jewish identity and saying, okay, I'm Jewish. That's what when the Torah comes out and there's a bar or a bat mitzvah, we ask the kids to say it, as Rabbi Susan said, as a sign that they're accepting Torah and Judaism, that they're becoming
So
adults. We say it before we die, before we go to bed, when we get up in the morning. It is our link to our religion, whatever we decide that religion is.
So like, I just want to sort of contextualize Toby that a lot of what Toby is saying right here is uniquely post-World War II American Jewish approach to this, which is just to sort of sociologically frame that thinking. Other thoughts? Yeah, Sarah.
Is it because the fact that the prayer is straight pulled from the Torah that it gives the rabbis authority that they wouldn't have with maybe something like a constructed prayer? They're able to just say, this is straight Torah, pure authority. It's legitimizing what I'm teaching you.
Yeah, nice. So it looks like Toby's saying something, but I'm not hearing anything.
I mean,
No,
Toby.
I was commenting on Dawn's cuteness sitting, falling asleep on her lap. And I'm just enjoying the look of a baby right now. We could all use that look.
Really?
Renee, were you going to say something?
Yeah, Toby sort of mentioned, that the Shema is it's the last thing that a Jew is supposed to say before he or she dies. And that's so, in some ways it always sort of puzzled me, because it actually is a prayer that addresses the entire community. Hear, O Israel, So at the moment that you're leaving the community and you're doing it pretty much exclusively by yourself,
it also
the last shout out to everybody, as
Well,
to who you are.
be like Rabbi Talvi says when she says, "Listen, you God restless," Hashem is going to speak, and maybe that's why we got to listen to what he's saying. I don't know.
In
following my Yisrael.
Can I follow up on what Renee said? Following what Renee said, though, all the Jewish martyrs are said to have spoken the Shema. So they are talking to other people, and they're talking to their murderers, like during the Inquisition. They're talking to the bystanders who are listening and sharing on their being burned alive. They're being drawn and quartered. Rabbi Akiva, those were his last words as the Romans were stripping the skin from his body. Apparently, it's a very important prayer to Jews who are Jewish. And it's a way of, hey, you might have killed me, but you didn't kill the inside of me. You didn't kill my philosophy. We're still here.
So I want to pull a few things out of what a number of us have said. And I just want to point out that between sort of Toby and Bobby and Sarah, we just got like 2,200 years of Jewish history in relationship to the Shema. And what I'm hoping we can see is how much of that, like our understanding of what Shema means today seems so certain and so old. And in some ways, that was the case 1,000 years ago, at a very different meaning of the Shema. Like it's a very different concept today than it was 1,000 years ago, because of the Crusades, because of the Holocaust, post-Holocaust theology, right? Like in some senses, Bobby, your framing of that is we can understand sociologically as a post-Holocaust kind of framing also, right? In a different way from Toby's. But the other way I'd suggest we look at this, and I apologize, this is a little cynical, is remember that the rabbis who are constructing the Talmud have very little authority, or they're fighting for authority within their community. And so what is the clearest way that someone is a part of the rabbinites and the rabbinic movement, which is how I want us to understand this? Right? These people are a little closer to Seventh-day Adventists than they are to how we imagine rabbis, right? They're knocking on doors. They're like working people and trying to get them to be rabbinic Jews. What they are offering and what they are selling as an image for Judaism is new and revolutionary and not viewed as authentic. It's viewed as upstart. So if someone is joining their prayer gatherings, and I want to put prayer gatherings here, like if you've seen Muslim prayer, where it's 10 to 15 minutes, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about like long evening minyan. We're talking about, 10 to 15 minutes gathering and affirming that you're a part of this revolutionary movement as a part of it. And I think that's why they put so much focus and attention on the participation in this, as opposed to the long tractates that you get about lost property, because this is a very public way of affirming your inness or your outness of a revolutionary movement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thoughts on that? Does that make sense?
That's not cynical.
No. Yeah. Isn't that kind of like when after the early Christianity got really intense, they added that extra prayer against heretics? Because it's that community identifier. It's putting up the boundaries around what a community is and affirming that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think you're onto something there. And I think that's why, for instance, the phenomenon of Jewish Buddhists, or Boo Jews, or whatever order you want to say it in, has never been seen in a threatening way by the mainstream Jewish community. Whereas even small, tiny movements like the Jews for Jesus movement have been treated as, 5-alarm fires, because I think Christianity I think Judaism is extremely tolerable of theological heresy, right? Look at our total comfort with absolute atheism, and that's not new. That you found a comfort in that in Judaism for a long, long time. You find references in the Mishnah that approach that, right? And yet at the same time, Christianity, converting to Christianity has always been like, you're gone and out of the community. And for me, I would suggest that's a tribal violation of identity and has nothing to do with theology.
Right.
Because I don't think we draw boundaries, or we tend to draw boundaries theologically on identity, but we do if you violate the tribal demands. And for most of the last 2,000 years, becoming Christian was becoming a part of our persecutor. It wasn't a theological decision from the Jewish communal perspective. It was joining the pogrom community. Okay. We ended up doing a lot of Jewish identity talk today for doing Talmud. Any final thoughts on all of this before we say goodbye? And I'll be back at 7 for Pirkei Avot, which was going to be much like this.
I've got a couple of thoughts. One.
Oh, hey, Natalie.
Yeah, I've been here. I was about 10 minutes late because I overslept. But
Perfect.
But you're in time to say the Shema.
But one of the things I was thinking about with the Shema, when you think about the words, okay, listen, Israel. Israel, listen, contenders with God, which includes myself and all others. God is one. You're reaffirming in death your belief in that God is one and that he is your God. And you're saying to others, remember this. It's not so much a prayer as a pronouncement to remember this, and a remembrance to yourself. Your last thoughts are to remember that God is your God. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I was looking for the reference. I can't remember whether it's in the Talmud. One of the interesting things is so many of the things that you're referencing are actually pulled in our later theological sort of combinations of Talmudic pieces. In particular, one of the images that we've talked has been referenced a few times is Rabbi Akiva's death. Right, Natalie referenced something that came from that, or the whole idea of saying Shema when you die, or that comes from this story of Akiva's rebellion, which I think we're going to talk about in the 7 o'clock class, so I won't say more now. Okay, any other last thoughts?
Yeah, just something about the fact that the prayer is called Shema, listen. It's the listen prayer, you know. So that's sort of interesting, you know, like listening, you know, you could kind of think of it as passive, you know, kind of a passive practice, although the reciting of it is not. But I don't know, there's just something there, again, about a balance between the activity and then just the creating the openness, you know, the open space for listening. You know, that makes it so crucial to do it 3 times a day. Don't forget it. Don't go to sleep without doing it.
Yeah, there's something deeply Hasidic in your approach, Renee.
Okay.
I think
Uh,
also the
yeah,
fact that it's such a small prayer. I mean, as far as Jews, we have so many different theologies and diversity, but it comes down to this one very distinct belief.
So I'm trying to
Look at
pull
that
it up
cute
right
baby.
now. Yeah,
Who is
look at
that
little one.
baby? Yeah.
So,
That's baby
Yeah.
Nathaniel.
oh,
He's going to be 2 months old on Thursday.
2 months. Wow.
No, I know, it's crazy.
So
Wow.
just to note that when the rabbis say Shema, they're actually talking about a much larger thing.
yeah.
They're talking about this first line, Shema Yisrael. They're talking about the second line, Baruch Shem Kavod. They're talking about Via Hafta, that whole section. We're talking about another paragraph called Vihaya, which speaks of direct reward and punishment for the observance or non-observance of the commandments. It's one of the very first things that the early Reform movement cut. And then a final section that talks about the practical use of Jewish ritual for keeping you on the straight and narrow. So they're talking about something that's a 5-minute process. That's what I would call it probably. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Until next week. But this Thursday, I haven't done a very good job publicizing it, but emails will go out. This Thursday evening is Shavuot, and we are going to have all night learning with lots and lots of different teachers. So I hope you'll
And how do
join
we
in.
get on? Go to
How do we
How do we get on?
We'll share the link. We'll have it on the CRC website. It'll probably be the easiest way to do it. Starts at 7 with a thing.
Zoom
Jen's
or
leading,
stream? Is it Zoom or stream?
Join Zoom.
And is
Join the
there a
Zoom.
menu with the different classes?
Yeah, when you come and join the Zoom, we'll help you get into the right one.
Okay.
And Daniel,
I'm teaching at 11:30 the real story of who wrote the Bible.
and are you going to bring cheesecake to
The
everybody?
real story.
It'll be here. Okay.
Yeah,
I will
they'll
see
be-
everyone. Hopefully, I'll see some faces in half an hour.